Until about 1930, it was unheard of to play ball on Sunday. About the only way to play was for little kids to get out and choose up for a game. Then the bigger ones would slowly join in, and the first thing you know, there was a ball game going. About 1930, Rita McGahee and Walter Owen Hood started sponsoring Sunday leagues and some commercial leagues. They came up with the idea of playing some of the games on Sunday so that the boys who worked on Saturday could have an opportunity to play. There have been many amateur baseball leagues in metro Atlanta, and league names could be misleading. For instance, Hapeville and Grant Park were in the Suburban League. College Park and Sylvan Hills were in the Southern League. But the most unusual thing about baseball in the 20s and 30s is that no one played on just one team. If your home team was not playing on a particular day, a player would play on any other team having a vacancy. One day you would play for Hapeville, and the next day for Hapeville's arch rival. The player's motivation was simple: the desire to satisfy the need to play ball anywhere, anytime.
We moved to Hapeville in 1920, and I always had a natural love for baseball. I had 6 brothers, and everybody said all of us were born with a baseball bat in our hands. You had to have a lot of fun playing ball back in the 20s and 30s, because that's about all you got out of it. Nobody got paid for playing ball. The businessmen of Hapeville have always helped by sponsoring a team and buying uniforms. We had to buy our own equipment. I got started playing on the Georgia Baptist Children's Home field, which was behind our home on Virginia Avenue. I moved up and began playing with the JOY class at the First Baptist Church, and then with the other Hapeville teams. Tubby Walton was a very popular person in the Atlanta area during the 20s and 30s. He had retired from professional baseball and was a scout for the St. Louis Cardinals. His restaurant on Edgewood Avenue was a popular hangout for baseball-minded people. When a baseball manager in the Atlanta area or state of Georgia needed a player, they would call Tubby. He was kind of like a supermarket handling baseball players. In the summer of 1932, Tubby sent me and 2 others to Baxley, Georgia. They didn't give us any money for bus fare, and we had to hitchhike. When we got there, they placed us in homes of people who loved baseball. We didn't get any salary, just room and board. I was placed in the home of a druggist and was treated very well. In fact, I ate ice cream sundaes all summer. The next summer, Tubby sent me to Helena McRae. I was leading the club in hitting, and then we went to Cordele to play a game. The Cordele manager offered me a turkey if I would play for him. That was one of the highlights of my career. I played with Dixie Steele from 1935 to 1943 in the Atlanta Commercial League, and we were one of the better metro teams. I didn't get paid for playing ball, but I was given a job at their plant, and it was a good feeling to have a steady job during the Depression. My big break came in 1944. I won a starting position with the St. Paul Club, which was in the American Association Class AA. I finally hung up my glove in 1950. The first known baseball club in Hapeville was organized by Leo Moore in 1894. The players were Pat Patterson, Lonnie Doan, Bob Estes, Wayne Moore, Eugene Baker, Lamar Poole, Frankie Lane, and Ed Estes. This uniform is believed to be worn by the Hapeville team of the 1890s. The next team was organized about 1910 and probably played in the Flint River League. The ball field was located on the northeast corner of Atlanta Avenue and Pine Street, behind Mr. Morris' house. Some of the players were Charles Grubb Brown, Newton Baldwin, Bill Holloway, Joe Threlkill, Knox and DeWitt Huey, Gene Kirkland and Carl, Lon Mack and Theron Nesbitt. Charlie Whaley was the manager. In 1920, baseball had become a very popular sport in Hapeville. The first 9 team was organized. The team was composed of players with the most talent, and most were just inside their teens. Some team members were Greer Barnhart, Ward Neary, Alvin Appling, Charles Brown, Son Heery, Earl Waddy, Joe Threlkill, Guy Barron, Ed Morgan, and Joe Bryant. There were many good players who did not make the first 9, and they organized the second 9. Some of the players were Hoyt Smith, Gene Evans, Speedy Green, Clifton Fonville, Owen Fowler, and Leon Harrison. About 1923, 2 other teams were organized, the Skeeters 9 and the Sunrise team. The Skeeter teams were organized by Alton Nash, and the players were Noonie McElhannon, Earl Colley, Alton Nash, Ed Camp, Earl Camp, Pencil Neck Fowler, Powell Purdue, Ellis Camp, and Red Wells. The Sunrise players were Speedy Green, Alton Smith, Clifton Woodall, James Eubanks, Terrapin Heery, Amos Evans, Woodrow Colley, Charles Hammett, and Arthur Allen. About 1925, the Hapeville ball field was moved from Atlanta Avenue to the airport near the entrance way across from present-day Morrison. Some remember the white arch over the old airport entrance way. The girlfriends of the players would travel by horse and buggy, car, or whatever to the games on Saturday afternoon and be the cheering section. And this led to romance. Among others, Cora Lee married Norris McElhannon. Benny Davis organized a Baptist JOY class baseball team in 1927. The bat boy is Josh Estes. The front row left to right, Ellis Casey, Bob Chapman, Johnny Stitt, and Rudolph Applin. The back row, Amos Evans, Speedy Green, Craig Henderson, Mr. Davis, R.S. Chapman, and Charlie Davis. The team won the Georgia League pennant that year. They also won the Young Christian Athletic Association trophy. Ellis Casey was the best right-handed pitcher Hapeville ever had. He decided not to play professionally, but continued to play locally for the love of the game. Olin Speedy Green on the left was probably the best outfielder that was around in those days. Doug Phillips on the right was the best natural hitter that ever came out of Hapeville. Amos Evans, a small man, could throw the fastest speed ball in this area. He could throw a ball so fast it looked like an aspirin coming towards you. The JOY class continued to sponsor the principal Hapeville team for several years. Willie Renfro was a manager, and some of the players were front row: Mr. Strickland, Amos Evans, Ellis Casey, Walt Waller, and J.D. Osborne. Second row, Walt Wallace, Penny Vinson, Clyde Osborne, Roy Mann, and Hugh Casey. This was probably the best team Hapeville has ever had. Other JOY team members were Norris McElhannon, Johnny Stitt, Bob Chapman, and Ellis Casey. Not pictured were Roy Mann, James Park, Doug Phillips, Alton Smith, and Myron Whaley. Some of Hapeville players were attending Russell High. On the 1929 school team were front row, far right, Top Ellington, and top left, Harold Smith. The 1931 senior team was a powerhouse of talent. Front row, far right, Top Ellington. Wiley Hogan, the rear, bat boy. Second row on the left, Walter Smith. Second row center, Howard Chapman. On the back row, second player, Hugh Gibson. Third, Ellis Camp. Hugh Gibson was a senior at Russell High in 1931, and he played first base. He was also voted the best all-round athlete. His first love was baseball, but he also excelled in football, basketball, and track. In the early 30s, Hapeville businesses sponsored the team, and it compared favorably with the best amateur teams around Atlanta. Mr. Harding was the manager. Wiley Hogan and Josh Estes were the bat boys. First row, Marion Whaley, Alton Smith, Slick Harrison, and Hubie Leftwich. Second row, Mr. Hardin, Oscar Fricks, Ellis Casey. The umpire's name is unknown. E.S. Mathis, Amos Evans, Hugh Gibson, and Dink Hornsby. Note the players wore a wide variety of uniforms. Carl Gorman managed the Georgia Baptist Orphan's home team from 1928 to 1931. The home field was one of Hapeville's best and was near the intersection of present-day South Whitney and Virginia Place. In the 20s and 30s, Hapeville, Georgia National Guard got their summer camp training at Fort McClellan, Alabama. And even at camp, they took their baseball serious. Some of the Hapeville Company B team members were Top Ellington, Alton Smith, Tommy Clance, Grady White, and Ed Bonds. Jesse Smith's father, William Smith, was a baseball booster, and he could be counted on to have a large jug of water attached to the front bumper of his car for the thirsty players to use during a game. In one of Hapeville's home games, Top Ellington and Herman Brown were both chasing a fly ball. They ran into each other and both were knocked out. Top was carried to the hospital and Herman was revived at the field. The city became involved with recreation in 1937 when the WPA cleared and developed a baseball field near Meadow Road and Clare Drive. The WPA also built the stone step bleachers across the street in the park. Volunteers kept the field in shape by dragging a log across the field behind a truck. On March the 7th, 1939, the City Council appointed Rufus Mabry, A.C. McLucas, and A.C. Reynolds as Hapeville's first baseball and athletic commissioners. The Hapeville Aces were formed in 1938 and played about 4 years. Wilfred Wimpy Tillison was the manager, and he also pitched occasionally. Front row left to right, Hoyt Smith was the umpire, Walt Schenck, Alton Smith, Jack Buckhannon, Walt Smith, Lawrence Schenck, David Morris, and Woodrow Tucker was the scorekeeper. Back row, Harris Moody, Edgar Redman, Herman Brown, Tom Brown, Top Ellington, Max Red Ivy, Larry Dodd, Wimpy Tillison, and Donald Smith, the bat boy. The Hapeville Aces played the West End Yardbirds on the Hapeville Park field, and it was a game the players will always remember. After a regular game of 9 innings, the Aces beat the Yardbirds 50-0. The Yardbirds got 1 hit and made 10 errors. A 50-0 game in those days was unheard of. Larry Dodd got only 1 hit during the game, and it hit the first baseman right between the eyes. The ball bounced across the street, and Dodd got a home run. Alton Smith managed the Aces in 1941 and won the first 10 games. A game was scheduled with Alton's old buddies at Dixie Steel, and Hapeville won 4-1. Duelkamp pitched and gave up only 4 scattered hits. During the game, Charlie Simonton hit a triple and tried to stretch it out for a home run. Charlie was thrown out at home plate and injured on the play. Some of his players were Hornsby, Stevenson, Ralph Bowen, Monk Beavers, Ed Gorman, Doodle Camp, Alton Smith, and Charlie Simonson. Hapeville's team was still a powerhouse in 1942. Doodle Camp was Hapeville's top pitcher during this time frame. Doodle's pitching and the Hapeville Bats won the contest 8-3. In 1944, Doodle Camp did the almost impossible. He jumped straight from the amateur baseball in Hapeville to professional big-time playing with St. Paul in the American Association League. His pitching created quite a stir, and by July he had won 10 games and lost 3. In 1943, the Hapeville team more or less disbanded because of World War II. Delta employees organized a team, and some of the Hapeville players were Hoyt and Alton Smith, Dave Holt, Top Ellington, Jesse Smith, Herman Brown. The Delta team remained active about 10 years. In 1955, Jesse Smith managed the reorganized Hapeville team, and the players batted their way to the top of the league. Smith was a good hitter as well as a good pitcher. VFW Post 117 sponsored the team, and the players left to right. Front row were Louis Scarborough, Gene Burke, Jesse Smith, and Dick Kelly. Back row, Doug Johnson, Charles Holbrook, Bob Smith, next player unknown. Haywood Wigley, Gene Terrell, Roy Adams, and Charles Gillespie. Following a general trend, adult amateur baseball interest waned in the late 50s, and Hapeville did not field a strong team after 1960.
Special recognition is given to these 4 men, Red Strickland, Tom Evans, Orrin Chapman, and Bear Reynolds, for without their consistent devotion and support, it is difficult to believe Hapeville baseball would have been the same. In 1972, Mayor Perry Hudson arranged a get-together for Hapeville's baseball greats of yesteryear, and the old-timers had a chance to tell some tall tales about their experiences. A year later, at Perry's invitation, a larger group of old-timers got together, and they were, left to right, bottom row, D.J. Osborne, Vic Cole, Alton Smith, Amos Evans, Orrin Chapman, Craig Henderson, Henry Heary, and Hoyt Smith. Top row, Doug Phillips, Johnny Mayer, Loy McElroy, Jimmy Futrell, Top Ellington, Speedy Green, Carl Gorman, Wayne Melton, and Ed Gorman. Not pictured were Russell Ray, Hubie Leftwich, Verlin Moore Jr., Parker Bryant, Johnny Stith, and Red Strickland. Hapeville owes much to those who played the game well and exemplified the spirit that still sets Hapeville apart from its contemporaries.
When I moved to Hapeville in 1925, I was kind of sport-minded. I remembered hearing people talk about the ball players who lived in Hapeville before I came here. Then I enjoyed being a part of the sporting activities. I hope my oral history interview in this program will express my thanks to the many people who helped us along. Always in my memory, I will be grateful to them. There was not much organized football in Hapeville during the early years. Your kid played some touch and a little bit of tackle in the cow pastures, backyards, and at the children's home, and over at the racetrack. Alton Smith represents the cow pasture players we had in those days, along with the Schenck brothers. Glenn Kirkland recalls that at this time, Hapeville had one of the finest places to play football and baseball in the world. It was over in Virginia Park, called the Ragweed Bowl. Starting in 1928 into the early 30s, Hapeville students attended Russell High School. Coach R.L. Boeing became coach in the fall of '29, and he modeled teams that were hard to beat. Charles Reddick was one of the best running guards at Russell High. He made all NGIC 3 straight years. Then he went on to play at Monroe A&M and has received a scholarship to Georgia Tech. Jack Stallings was a boy that wasn't afraid of anything and is typical of the football players of the 30s. Other players of this era received scholarships to colleges are J.H. Holt, Middle Georgia College, Johnny Woods, Barnesville A&M, Larry Dodd and Woodrow Tucker both played at Oglethorpe. Alton Smith tells about the all-star team that played 2 games against the federal penitentiary. The players were Robinson, Colson, Landers, Hammett, Reddick, Morris, Woods, Clay, Brewer, Smith, Stallings, and DeShinks. Al Capone was one of the spectators. Alton said it was a lot of fun playing the prisoners. When they tackled you, they would help you get up. By the fall of 1932, Coach Bowen had produced the greatest team that ever toiled on Russell's gridiron. The boys from Hapeville on this team were Jack and Jim Clay, Swede Morris, Lawrence Baskin, Curtis Gray, Perry Hudson, Hugh Smith, and Hugh Gibson. Jack Clay later played at Vanderbilt, and Jim played at Georgia Tech. The girls at Russell decided they wanted to get in the act, so they organized a team. However, they were more interested in catching the fellows than the football. In 1936, the 9th grade was added to College Street School. Roy Brewer organized the first football team. A quote from the 1940 annual reads, "In the history of athletics for this class, football probably has been the best liked. With Coach Brewer's able leadership, our relationship will bring fond memories in the years to come." After coaching for 36 years, Brewer retired in 1972. Under the tutelage of Coach Brewer and Baker, and led by Captain Pierce Haney, Hapeville completed the most successful season in the history of the school. The 1940 team won the Fulton County Championship in the North Georgia Football Association. Senior players on this team were Fulton Brackett, James Brooks, Doyle Childers, Pierce Haney, Kelly Moat, Fred Nash, William Sewell, and Shine Caldwell, and Johnny Wilkins. James Clay also played in the 40s. Hapeville High had the honor of being represented on the all-star team in Fulton County by Kelly Moat, offensive end. This game was played at Grant Field on December the 14th, 1940. Then we gave him to Duke University, where he captained that team and played offensive end on the All-Southern Conference team in 1945. I think Kelly Moat was the best football player ever to come out of Hapeville, closely followed by Jeff Knox. Frank Coggin and Bilbo Evans were the Hornets' big stingers for the class of 1944. Under the careful coaching of Eddie Baker, a team was produced that won 7 out of 10 games. Tom Hambrick was captain and Franklin Whitaker was alternate. Senior players were Forrest Attaway, Willie Smith, Johnny Tucker, John Wells, and Tommy Whiteley. Jeff Knox was captain of the football team and was an honor athlete in the class of '47. Both Jeff and Charles Bush were offered scholarships to VMI, but Jeff chose to play at Georgia Tech. Other seniors on this team were Felton Allgood, R.D. Davis, Clyde Denmark, Jimmy Lane, Richard Paula, Tommy McDonald, and Willie Welch. In 1946, Earl Collett designed the stadium proposed for Hapeville High. With the prospects of a new stadium and better facilities to work with, the Hornets hoped to return to their winning stride. George Johnson was on the first team to play in the new stadium in the fall of 1947. Some of the seniors on the first-string team were Carlton Dodd, Ernest Layton, Tommy Cornett, John Wells, Charles Seaver, Walter Quinn, Jack Davis, and Tommy McDonald. Hapeville's 8th grade team won the county championship in 1949. They were undefeated. Standing left to right is Mickey Blaylock, Sonny Welcher, Mortimer Sims, and the Galloping Ghost, Emery Chronister, Jody Bailey, and Wesley Owens. Sitting is Glenn Blaylock, Ernie White, and Captain Wilson Owens, Kenneth Sugarboy Pruitt, and Harold Hughes. Emery Chronister, the little Galloping Ghost, was the star back for the Hapeville midget team. The Baby Hornets, as they were called, played on Hapeville's high school field in the Tom Thumb Bowl. Spirits and tempers were aroused by football, and everyone in town joined the celebration, which brought out the local policemen and firemen to quell the routs. James Clay, Chief Pearson, and Jason Clay. Senior Captain David Mobley hands the ball over to Cotton Johnson in 1950. Some familiar names on the team in the 50s were Tom Welch, Darrell Haynes, Wilfred Hammett, Johnny Barrow, Hoke and Hort Bradley, and Abe Brogdon. Boys going to college on football scholarships were David McMurrin, Tulane, Wade Schumann, Florida State, and Hope Bradley, Georgia. The success of a team doesn't entirely depend upon the ability of the players, but instead it rests upon the shoulders of a good coach. Our thanks to Coach Campbell, better known as Little Man. Some of the boys he coached are Mark Schumann, Jimmy Roberts, Larry Wills, Joe Bingham, Richard Pinion, Jimmy Whitted, and Charlie Thompson, who was named state's best halfback on All-Star varsity team. In 1960, when Jack Hudson was offensive center for Hapeville, he played opposite Bill Curry, who was the center for College Park. After the thorough beating he took from Bill, Jack now understands how Curry got to be coach at Tech. Other good Hapeville players who were beaten by College Park are Jimmy Camp, David Harris, Charles Hudgens, Jimmy Stark, Doug Gibson, Bobby Polk, and quarterback Tommy Smith. Coach Howard always greeted students with a warm and friendly smile. He came to Hapeville High in 1949 and was there for 21 years. When he was asked what has changed most since he has been at Hapeville, Coach Howard replied, "I think there are more smart students now, but also more smart alecks." According to Coach Brewer, one of the outstanding teams was in 1963. This team had 3 Tri-City All-Stars, Ronnie Starr, Doug Stanford, and Eddie Hudson. Other players who made this a good team are John Vance, Warren Walker, Mickey McKay, Tommy Kinsey, Ricky Oxford, Jimmy Brooks, Nick Boris, Steve Diffley, and Jim Ballinger. Terry Ellington's skillful blocks make Stan Beaver's bootleg a success. Beaver's success was continued in his college career when he played 3 varsity years at Georgia Tech. Also from this team, Dennis Goss played at Clemson, Randy Kinsey went to VMI, and Bobby Castles won an athletic scholarship to Brown University. Rusty Hudson makes sure of his date after the game. Rusty is now coaching at Lake Shore High School. On this team with Rusty was Ted Nance, All-State halfback, and Tommy Tyner, All-State tackle. Coaches Tom Brown and Ed Daniel are proud of the Hornets, and they say that football develops teamwork and school spirit. They recall the following boys who received scholarships to colleges. Hank Rast and Randy Thomas went to Swanee. Steve Long, Memphis State. The class of 1971 had the first winning seasons since 1962 and the first region championship in the history of Hapeville High School. Coaches Haney, Watts, and Teague molded the winning team, and each member contributed his time and his talent and worked for one goal, a winning season with a region championship. Much of the team's determination and spirit can be attributed to the excellent coaching of George Haney, head coach of Haney's Hornets. He remembers that 1974 team had a good year and that Paul Ordner and Ray Rickett received a football scholarship to Gordon. Warren Rogers was Western Carolina, and Tim Purcell played at Davidson. Anyone in Hapeville who has ever slid into second base, made a first down, or intercepted a pass in the era of 1925 to 1976 knows Joe Strickland. Joe felt that sports provided valuable training for young people and was an excellent spectator activity for people of all ages. Joe was a deeply rooted Bulldog supporter and organized the Bulldog Club in Hapeville for the University of Georgia. He and the staunch Bulldog fans always followed the teams by bus and plane. In 1943, they traveled as far as the Rose Bowl to watch Georgia defeat UCLA by a score of 9-0. Joe had 3 loves in his life: sports, politics, and the city of Hapeville. One of his favorite quotes was, "I love to travel, but when the sun sets, I want to be in Hapeville." Play ball is affectionately dedicated to the memory of Joe Strickland.
Take me out to the bar. Shortly after World War I, a man named Neesmith tacked up a couple of peach baskets at opposite ends of a gymnasium, and a new game came into existence. Basketball became popular in the Hapeville area in the early 1920s. There were no public playing facilities, and the kids played on makeshift courts. Basketball at College Street School was organized in 1926, when school teachers Edith Ruff, Lucille Scarborough, and Tessie Smith, assisted by Dan Wells, organized a 7th grade team. Mildred Schenck coached the team to a Fulton County school championship. Team members were Harold Smith, captain, Frank Barnett, Ralph Barra, Jack Clay, Woodrow Colley, Top Ellington, Walter Smith, and Leland Woodrow. The 1928 7th grade team was coached by Edna Burke, and the team became the Fulton County champs again. Players were Herman Brown, Jim Clay, Billy Epperson, Curtis Gray, and Lawrence Schenck. By winning the championship 2 out of 3 years, they were entitled to keep the trophy permanently. Other outstanding players of this era were Ennis Kirkland, Wallace Segrist, Kelly Moat, Jeff Knox, and Johnny Woods. Hapeville did not have a girls' basketball team in the 1920s. The twins, Ollie and Arlene Smith, loved the game and practiced on a makeshift court in their backyard on Margaret Street. They later played on the Epworth Methodist Court on Sim Street. In the mid-1920s, they became star players at Fulton High School. Cornelius Ellington, better known as Top, was voted best all-around senior at Russell High School, class of 1931. He was class treasurer, president of the athletic club, and a star basketball player. John Lewis transferred to Russell High when it opened in 1926. Members of his 1930 basketball squad were Front Row, Toddy Yao, James Camp, Top Ellington, Dean Stith, Hugh Gibson, and Lawrence Schenck. In the back row were Leon Wallace, Walter Smith, N.S. Johnson, Coach John Lewis, James Hamilton, Homer Miller, and Carlisle Vason. Ed Baker coached the 1945 Hapeville team to a 5th District High School championship. First row were Tommy Cornett, manager, Captain Bobby Hayes, Coach Ed Baker, and Robert Clayton. In the second row, Robert Whitaker, Clinton Eads, and Joe Conine. Third row, Jesse Smith, J.L. Wallace, Ernest Hogue, Bill Moat, and Richard Paula. Hapeville's first indoor court was about 1930 when the new Methodist Church converted the top floor of the educational building into a court. The next came when the Children's Home built an indoor gym in 1940. The city's first indoor court came when the City Recreation Building was constructed in 1948. Red Strickland was a legendary sports figure around Hapeville for half a century. Red, more or less a sports promoter, was interested in promoting any kind of sport, baseball, basketball, anything. The Hapeville Aces basketball team was organized by the players in 1929 and managed by Red Strickland. The team continued active until about 1940. Among other awards, the Aces won the 1934 Jonesboro Invitational Tournament, and the players were Hubert Brewer, James Camp, Loy Doodle Camp, Belton Clark, Top Ellington, Hugh Gibson, Jack Stallings, and Cecil Stevenson. After World War II, Top continued his interest in basketball and organized the Hapeville Jokers. The team won many awards and trophies during the 7 years of active play. The Jokers had a shootout in 1952 with the Atlanta Army Depot team. Both were in the Army Civilian League. The Army Depot had a large reservoir of pros and college players to call on. Top's crew gave it their best and felt they had won, even with second place. Left to right, Thomas Zupp, Ernest Hogue, Lewis Wright, Bert Gordon, Jesse Smith, Bobby Peake, Travis Strickland, and Top Ellington holding the trophy. James Bird Gordon played 2 years with the Jokers. After graduating from Hapeville High, he joined the bearded House of David basketball team and played over 200 games with them. Bird had one trouble. He positively could not grow a beard. The bearded team finally had to bill him as the 7-foot wonder who could not grow a beard. Some 40 Joker team members played 1 or 2 years. The Jokers were the principal basketball players of Hapeville during this period. Edwin Caldwell, Ernest Hogue, and Jesse Smith played 7 years. Johnny Wilkins 6, Bobby Hayes 5, Bob Smith and J.L. Wallace and Millard Posey 4, and Carlton Dodd and Bobby Peake played 3 years. This team first started out as a Methodist team about 1949, then a post office team, and finally the Hapeville hardware team about 1951. The players front row, Don Smith, Richard Paula, Jeff Knox, and Sammy Lewis. Back row, Robert Whitaker, Gene Foster, the manager, James Townsend, Clyde Bone, Bill Harp, and Harville Upchurch. The team disbanded about 1952 and played with the Jokers. Hapeville Furniture Company sponsored a basketball team from about 1955 to 1962, and it too was very active. The players on this 1961 team were front row, Jesse Smith and Ken Leslie. Back row, Emery Suggs, Bobby Polk, Grady McCalman, Ted Coinsmark, Roger Weldon, Buddy Clark, and Charlie Thompson. Hapeville did not field a team after the Hapeville Furniture team disbanded. Whether or not there's any truth to the legend that Abner Doubleday invented baseball shortly after the War of Secession ended, it is certainly true that by the early 1920s it had been established as our national sport. It was only natural that the great American game filtered down to the youth. A bat, a ball, and a bit of reasonably level terrain were sufficient opportunity for young boys and even a few tomboys to try to emulate their baseball heroes. Lives there a boy who breathes, who is not wanted to step up to the plate and slam a home run?
He stands at the plate with his heart pounding fast. The bases are loaded, the die has been cast. Mom and Dad cannot help him, he stands all alone. A hit at this moment would send the team home. The ball nears the plate, he swings and he misses. There's a groan from the crowd with boos and some hisses. A thoughtless voice cries, "Strike out, you bum!" Tears fill his eyes. The game's no longer fun. Remember, he's just a little boy who stands all alone. So open your heart and give him a break, for it's moments like this a man you can make. Keep this in mind when you hear someone forget. He's just a little boy and not a man yet.
Around 1927, Uncle Jack Grantham and Ernest Morris organized a baseball league in Hapeville similar to the Pee Wee League of today. The objective was to help young boys develop whatever baseball talent they might have so that they could move up the baseball ladder of achievement. Modesty had yielded to self-confidence among these eager young players, and they chose to call their organization the Tip Top League. Jack Grantham managed the Forest Hill Park team in the Waters-Jonesboro Road area. Ernest Morris handled the team from Hammond Park and the Mount Zion Road area. Howard Chapman managed the North Avenue Club west of Stewart Avenue. The Methodist Church sponsored the Alley Cats in the Atlanta Union Avenue area. Top Ellington and Johnny Woods, the Virginia Park team, and the Georgia Baptist Orphan's Home also fielded a team. Tip-top ball fields were located around the city. There was one near present-day Northside Drive and North Avenue, another one on Oakdale Road near Campbell Circle, At the southeast intersection of Willingham Drive and Colville Avenue, known as the Ragweed Bowl, Ma Voice Flat on Atlanta Avenue at Pine, Mr. Haney's Pasture on Union Avenue, and the Orphan's home near the curve on South Whitney. Problems arose in 1939 over usage of the newly built baseball field at Clare Drive and Meadow Road. The City Council established a baseball and athletic commission to establish rules and utilization of the field. Commission members were Rufus Mabry, A.C. Clint McLucas, and A.C. Reynolds. John Lawrence, a Ford employee, moved to Hapeville in 1945 and became very active in community affairs. He had deep convictions on the upbringing of boys and believed that by helping youth develop today, you help in the development of your community tomorrow. On March 31st, 1953, he secured the first Little League charter issued in the state of Georgia. John Lawrence recruited 3 Delta friends, men who shared his ideals: Jim Turner, Jim Goley, and Jim Terry. In the early organizational days, most of the help came from Delta ranks. As John Lawrence furnished the inspiration, Jim Turner furnished the organizational leadership to the budding Little League. He also found time in the years that followed to assist managing and coaching as his job permitted until his health declined. The 1977 Willie Mays Amateur Souvenir Brochure was dedicated to the memory of Jim Turner. His devotion, his dedication, and his determined personal effort to establish a baseball program for boys has made possible our World Series in 1977. So his friends join in saying once again, "Thanks, Jim," in memory of the man who did so much for so many, so often. Jim Goley, a Delta pilot, hit the ground running in 1951 and never let up. He coached one of the first teams in 1953. He served in many capacities during the 1950s and 60s, including manager of the Little League from about 1960 through 1962. Jim continued working with the Little League until his health failed in the 1970s. It would be impossible to recall the many, many contributions of Jim Terry to the Little League. Starting in 1951 and continuing into 1986, he has worked as a team manager and as an official of the league, willing to do whatever was necessary to keep the field in good playing condition, and after 35 years, he still mans the concession stand. Ordinary Little League policy was to select the most talented boys for teams. Hapeville's policy was that any boy who wanted to play was given the opportunity. They developed some very unbaseball rules. The boys were required to attend Sunday school regularly. Profanity was not tolerated, nor fighting, ridiculing, or teasing another player for ineptness. The stated objective was, we are looking not so much for star ball players as star citizens. The 4 and others worked hard during the years of 1951 and 52, organizing, preparing, enlisting help, and raising funds. Individual and businesses contributed money and services, such as Jackson Block Company furnishing blocks to build the dugouts. Volunteers helped get the field in playing condition. However, rarely was there enough funds, and the difference was made up from their pockets. Additional men were enlisted for the 1953 season. M.L. Brown and Barney Sullivan from Delta, and Henry Reeves, Henry Heery, and F.E. Stein from the community. Initially, Little League season started in June after school was out. The first Little League teams were fielded in the summer of 1953. By 1954, sufficient funds were generated to spend approximately $2.20 on each boy, which included cap, decal jersey, and rule book. Johnny Lawrence models the new cap and jersey. The officers and team managers for 1954 were seated left to right, Henry Heery, C.R. Billington, John Lawrence, Robert Whitaker; standing, Jim Terry, Joe White, Jim Turner, Jim Goley, M.L. Brown, and Al Myers. Henry Reeves and Barney Sullivan were not present for the picture. They fielded 4 teams plus the farm teams. John Lawrence was continuously boosting the Little League at club meetings and civic occasions. And talk about talking. Jim Terry says John Lawrence was nicknamed Gabby because he not only had the first word, but the last word also, except, of course, when Mrs. Lawrence was around. Exchangeite John T. Lawrence presented plaques to Delta men Jim Terry, M.L. Brown, Jim Turner, Jim Goley, and Pat Billington, with John Lawrence in the center, for the 1954 season. Barney Sullivan is not pictured in this and many other pictures because his night work prevented attendance at picture-taking events. The winning team was managed by Henry Reeves, who died a short time before. The Hapeville Exchange Club was experiencing a period of low membership in the middle 1950s, primarily because they did not have an ongoing project that created widespread interest. At the same time, the fledgling Little League had begun to have problems in raising sufficient funds for growing members of the Little League. Exchange President Adair McCord and John Lawrence were aware of each other's problems, and they began to talk. The two discovered that by combining their resources, they could resolve their problems. In January 1955, the Exchange Club agreed to sponsor the Little League, and the Little League personnel agreed to join the Exchange Club in a project that has continued to the present time. To fulfill their financial commitments to the Little League, the Exchange Club had to raise a good sum of money each year. One of their many money-raising projects was a barbecue. The cooking started the night before, and all night a handful of men kept the fires going and the barbecue and stew cooking. Some of the chief cooks and bottle washers were Hugh Hallman, J.T. Gabby Lawrence, Jim Terry, and Mr. Foles. The next morning, the boys also helped. This crew folded serving boxes and wrapped forks and knives in a napkin. Other volunteers manned the many stations to serve, selling and taking up tickets, serving the food and keeping the lines running smoothly and well supplied, and the big cleanup after another successful barbecue. The queues continued for many years. One of the more popular fundraisers was the Little League calendar, featuring the Little Leaguers and other personnel and community information. For a quarter, you could get your name printed on your birth date. The primary fundraiser over the years has been the concession stand at the field. Watermelon stands were also set up in seasons. Selecting a baseball queen generated a lot of fun, enthusiasm, and competition. Almost everyone could get into the act, boys and girls. Judging was developed into an exact science. One method provided that each of the teams would sponsor a young lady. Votes were in the form of pennies. The girl who collected the most pennies won, fair and square. Of course, the young lady who won the cup naturally was delighted, but the big winner was the teams, and everybody had fun. George Hudson was a former professional ball player and umpire. He moved to Hapeville in 1954 and lost little time in becoming involved with the Little League program. He and Barney Sullivan coached the Little League Giants in 1955 with a 14-2-2 record for the season. George Hudson was dedicated to instilling the will to win in those he coached. George Hudson organized the Babe Ruth League in 1956 and fielded 4 teams. He coached the Red Sox into first place that year. George Hudson coached the 1961 Babe Ruth All-Stars. Although the players didn't know it, George was ill at the time, and this would be the last team he would coach. George Hudson had contracted a terminal illness, and the youth of Hapeville, who had been coached by George, petitioned council. The Hapeville mayor and council adopted an ordinance naming the Babe Ruth ball field in honor of the man who had dedicated so many years as friend, coach, and counselor to the boys. The George Hudson Field was dedicated on April 27, 1962. Mayor Frank Coggin officiated, and William Bailey, president of the high school student council, gave the dedication address. Marjorie Hudson started keeping statistical records in 1956 and continued into the 1970s. She kept official records on games, hits, runs, errors, strikes, balls, and other technical data on the games. The Little League officers and managers for 1955 were front row, John Buckeye, John Young, M.L. Brown, Jim McCullough, Ted Pepin. Second row, Henry Heery, Charles Gillespie, Lewis Cowart, John Lawrence, Barney Sullivan, C.R. Billington, and Dave Holt. Third row, Jim Turner, Goldie Burrell, Harold Smith, George Hudson, Jim Terry, Owen Moore, and Fred E. Stein. Not pictured also in this were Guy Judy, W. Minnick, Sid O'Daniels, L. Robinson, Wint Sumner, and Jerry Williams. Little League managers and assistants for 1956 were Jim Terry, W. H. Tomlin, Winford Sumner, Harold Smith, Royce Cheney, Guy Judy, A.B. Harris, Dick Foster, Alton Smith, Lewis Cowart, Charles Keith, Charles Gillespie, Eddie Simmons, Goldie Burrell, Barney Sullivan, Charles Holbrook, Jerry Williams, James Bell, Jim Turner, John Powers, F.E. Stein, Henry Heery, Hugh Hallman, J.B. Bynum, Cliff Miller, L.A. Miller, Joel Heaton, and J.E. Zeke Williamson. The Little League was divided into three divisions: the farm team, ages 6, 7, and 8, the minor leagues, ages 9 and 10, and the majors, ages 11 and 12. 136 youngsters were signed up the first day of the 1954 season, and approximately 300 for the season. The first official practice was scheduled for Saturday, April 10, 1954, at the North Avenue School Field. Some 500 boys were expected to sign up for the 1955 season, and 13 teams were scheduled to play. The number of Little Leaguers grew steadily, and additional workers were enlisted. Major League captain was M.L. Brown, minor league captain John Young, and the farm team captain was J.R. Buckeye. Little Leaguers continued to grow, and in 1957 the youngsters and workers completely filled their favorite photographic location, the Stone Steps. A Little League clubhouse was built on the field, and the Exchange Club held their meetings there. Present for this 1959 meeting were Dr. Jose Samra, George Estey, Wint Sumner, Royce Cheney, Henry Heery, Jody Brown, Earl Smith, Dave Miller, Pierce Haney, Pope Hood, Martin Holder, Johnny O'Leary, and Bob Lambert. Paul Rivers became involved with the Little League in 1959 and assisted coaching that year. His continued interest in the city's youth moved him up to the position of manager of the Little League in 1963. He worked in this position for 4 years. Although declining in health, he continued the work he loved. The City Council's resolution recognizing Rivers' contributions read in part, "He always gave unselfishly of himself for others, but we remember him best, perhaps, for the last 20 years when he applied his skills and devoted so much of his time in service to the youth of today." Jesse Smith typifies the indispensable umpire. Traditionally, umpires took a lot of heat as they called them as they saw them. Jesse started in the mid-50s and continued on a regular basis into the 70s. In 1957, Henry Irvin coached this Little League team to a first-place position. Front row, Doyle Rakestraw, Greg Marshall, Donald Nazier, Richard Edwards, David Bradbury. Back row, Gary Lindsay, Arlen Hodges, Mike Wilder, Tony Samra, and Warren Sims. This 1966 farm team of 7-year-olds won the first-place trophy. Jim Morris was the manager. Tom Morris started coaching Little League in 1963 and worked as a team manager through 1970. The Cubs were the champs in 1969. Tom assumed a relationship with the AABC, that is, the American Amateur Baseball Conference, in the middle 1960s and continued to represent the Willie Mays League in Georgia until his death in 1986. Tom described his job as the middleman between the AABC, the city, and the Exchange Club. A baseball invitational tournament for 11 and 12-year-old boys was held in 1970, and the money raised was used to buy the first Little League uniforms. Tom Morris and Tom Marlin managed this 1970 Little League team. John Powers started working in the Little League in 1955 and coached the team every year until his heart attack in 1966. He was also active in fundraising, keeping the field in good repair, and helping wherever needed. John passed away in 1968. On June 3, 1969, the city named one of the baseball fields the John V. Powers Senior Field in honor of his dedicated service to Hapeville's youth. On August 14, 1971, the Little League field was named the John T. Lawrence Little League Field. Jim Terry, substituting for Jim Turner, who was in the hospital, made the dedication address. A large crowd gathered to pay tribute to the man who is best remembered as the father of present-day Little League. In 1973, the youth divisions were reorganized. Youngsters up to 10 years of age were placed in the Willie Mays division. Pee Wee Reese, 11 and 12. Stanley Koufax, 13 and 14. Mickey Mantle, 15 and 16. Connie Mack, 17 and 18. And Stan Musial League, ages 19 and up. Perry Walker was an individualist with a consuming desire to help the youth of Hapeville. He chaired the committee that built the high school memorial stadium. He coached for 6 years. His pocketbook was continuously open to assist boys who needed shoes, gloves, and other baseball items. He worked the concession stand and donated a popcorn machine. He chaired the 1977-78 and 79 Willie Mays World Series Committee. The youth of Hapeville are better off for having a man like Perry Walker walk this way. The biggest event in Hapeville's youth baseball history occurred when the city hosted the 1977 Willie Mays World Series for 9 and 10-year-olds. This major feat was accomplished by a committee chaired by Perry Walker, the city, and Tom Morris, the Georgia representative for Willie Mays activities. 8 teams from across the USA and Puerto Rico came to the John Lawrence Field to see who was the nation's very best. Hapeville also had the honor of hosting the 1978 and 1979 Willie Mays World Series. Hapeville will also host the 1986 Willie Mays World Series at the John Lawrence Field. Tom Morris was working on this project at the time of his death. Johnny Klein started working with the farm outs in 1970, continued through 1973. This is his 1972 farm out team, assisted by Gene Preston. In 1974-75, he managed the 9 and 10-year-olds. Johnny was chairman of the Exchange Club Baseball Committee in 1972 and has continued active in the Little League program. This 1979 T-ball team of 6-year-old boys and girls won first place for the year. Gail Kennard, Terry Hill, and Harold Green were the coaches. The 1982 or 83 Legionnaire team of the Pee Wee Reese League. Danny Gregg and Cullen Toole were the coaches. Rusty Hudson and Mark Andrews coached the Quick Pick Butchers in 1983. Rusty started playing in the Little League in 1955. In 1963, he started coaching Connie Mack and continued coaching until 1973. He coached Little League for the past 5 years. The Little League baseball program has been sponsored by the Exchange Club of Hapeville since 1955. It is a continuing challenge to provide financing as well as men to work with the boys. It would not be possible for the community to adequately express its appreciation. However, the biggest and best reward each exchangeite receives is the personal satisfaction of working with youth and assisting and molding their lives for a better tomorrow. The operation of the Little League would not be possible without the active support of the parents, especially the mothers.
The game of baseball used to be just faintly understood by me. Hitter, home run, mound, and walk were just a lot of men folks' talk. But since the Little League is here, I'm learning more and more each year. And as I sit up in the stands, I hold my head and wring my hands. And with my heart, I pitch each ball. I swing the bat and hear the call. When at home plate the ump calls out, I plead, I rant, I stomp and shout, until I realize with shame that this is just the children's game. We start dinner now at 4, and in and out my kitchen door, they come and go and eat and run, lest they be late and miss some fun. And when I leave, I must confess, my sink is sometimes quite a mess, piled high with dinners, pots, and pans, so I can be in the cheering stands. And when the game is played and o'er, and our boys chalks the losing score, a lemon soda, cold and tart, soon mends the loser's broken heart. Of course, a win or one good hit deserves a big banana split. And when I see them tucked in bed, when sleep has quieted all the noise, so many times at night I've said, thank God for baseball for our boys.
Welcome aboard Flight 1981, ladies and gentlemen. Our final destination will be Hartsfield Atlanta International Airport with intermediate historical stops. Please fasten your seatbelts and observe the no smoking sign.
Atlanta's pioneer aviator was a young man by the name of Jim Elliott. He bought his first plane in 1919. It was a Jenny JN-4, and he paid $3,500 for it. At that time, there was no other airplane or airport in the capital city. However, Mr. Elliott found an abandoned racetrack out near Hapeville. It was just across the street from Hapeville's Morrison's Cafeteria, and he leased it from Asa Candler for $150 a year. In the area of number 1, he did the nitty-gritty work of clearing 3.5 acres. Now this was the beginning of the Hartsfield Atlanta International Airport. Mr. Elliott erected a World War I canvas hangar to hold his plane, using homestretch number 2 for landings and takeoff. It was at this racetrack in the early 1900s that young Bill Hartsfield saw his first airplane in action. A young Frenchman by the name of Morrison flew his plane here in a race with an automobile and a motorcycle as an added attraction for the automobile race fans. The sightseeing flights were a regular Sunday afternoon affair. Many who were not so sure flying was a safe mode of travel were soon convinced that it was. It cost $5 for a 5-minute ride or $10 for a 10-minute ride. This is a journey over downtown Atlanta in the mid-20s, and the cost for this ride was $25. Stunning was a great attraction to draw crowds for sightseeing flights. This man would transfer from an automobile to an airplane or from plane to plane and even walk the wings of the plane while in flight. Some of the early daredevils were Bonnie Rowe and Mabel Cody. As early as 1924, the airplane was used for crop dusting in Macon, Georgia by Huff DeLand, but various things made it unsuccessful at this time. The first in Atlanta to teach and instruct a person how to fly an airplane on a continuous basis was this young man, Doug Davis. This is Doug's hangar near the home stretch on the racetrack in the early 20s. It is the first permanent building on Candler Field. Soon thereafter, Bela Blevins added a hangar and started instructing the art of flying and doing a lot of barnstorming. Hartsfield had already been elected to the Atlanta Automatic Board, and because of his enthusiasm for aviation, his first assignment was to look for a site for an airport. After looking at many places, he recommended to the board that the city lease the old Candler racetrack, which consisted of 284 acres. If any one man could be given credit for making the airport what it is today, it would have to be William B. Hartsfield, for it is due to his love for aviation and hard work that so many airlines intersect here when they could have easily developed an intersecting pattern in Birmingham, Chattanooga, or Charlotte. By 1927, a third hangar had appeared. Harold Pitcairn was in the business of building airplanes for the purpose of carrying mail only, no passengers. In 1928, the U.S. airmail bid from New York to Atlanta was opened, and Pitcairn was a successful bidder. However, by then, he had decided to stay in the manufacturing business and sold this contract to Eastern Air Transport. Late in the evening on May the 1st, 1928, the first U.S. airmail from New York arrived at Candler Field, piloted by Eastern Sid Malloy. This was another pioneer, Johnny Keidel. His plane was called the Mail Wing, and these were referred to as the Pony Express of the air. In the late 20s, the government requested that all airlines having a U.S. airmail contract put into service a plane that would carry both mail and passengers. This tri-motored Ford was among the first. It was dubbed the Tin Goose, all metal, no soundproofing, but you could open the windows for fresh air or air sickness. By 1929, Candler Field was really buzzing, and the city of Atlanta named Jack Gray the first airport manager. Here Jack is sitting at the controls of a 1910 model Curtiss Pusher. It had a control wheel, rudder bar, and throttle. The only instrument was an oil gauge. It had an OX-5 engine, which is water-cooled, 90 horsepower, speed was 40 miles per hour maximum, fuel capacity of 7 gallons, total weight 750 pounds. Wheel racing was one of the greatest sports of the early 1900s, but racing airplanes had become the sports attraction by the late 20s. The first Thompson Trophy given at the Cleveland Air Race was won by our own Doug Davis in 1929 with his Travel Air, the Mystery Ship. During the mid-20s, the boll weevil that marched out of Mexico to devastate cotton fields from one end of Dixie to the other, the airplane proved to be more satisfactory than conventional methods in fighting this boll weevil. In 1929, Mr. C.E. Woolman, having obtained a route from Dallas, Texas to Jackson, Mississippi, purchased 3 Travel Air monoplanes carrying 5 passengers each at 90 miles per hour. 1930 brought a name change to Delta Air Corporation, and the unwelcome news that the Post Office Department had awarded an airmail contract for a southern route to a rival airline. For 40 years, Mr. C.E. Woolman played a leading role in developing Delta from a crop dusting venture to that of a major modern airline. On December the 10th, 1930, the first passenger flight from Atlanta to New York was inaugurated. It was a Curtiss Condor, piloted by Doug Davis, now flying for Eastern. The flight took 8.5 hours. On reaching Greensboro, North Carolina, the passengers deplaned, went inside to a restaurant to eat, as there were no meals aboard. The fare to New York was $51.27. This little old lady, besides Doug Davis, is not a flight attendant, but a passenger. Some people were still not sure the flying machine was a safe way to travel, and this lady wouldn't fly with anyone but Doug. By the end of 1930, a hostess was added to the crew, and they were required to have a nurse's certificate. It wasn't coffee, tea, or me in those days, but Coke, cotton, or chewing gum. Coke, the pause that refreshes, cotton for your ears, as there was little soundproofing. Chewing gum, since the cabin was not pressurized, by chewing gum it relieved the pressure on your ears. This is the first sleeping berth in any commercial aircraft. The idea was conceived and installed by the men at Eastern in Atlanta. The airplane is a Curtiss Condor. Would you believe ERA in 1933? These four ladies are members of the 99ers, an organization made up of women pilots. The lady on the left is Hapeville's own Erin Darden, lady pilot in 1933. Amelia Earhart was one of the organizers of this club. The powder puff race is usually comprised of women from this organization. After an investigation in 1934, Postmaster General James Farley canceled all airmail contracts, and in February, the Army pilots were given the job of flying the mail. In order to qualify to rebid on the U.S. airmail contracts, no one could use the same name as was used on previous bids. For an example, Eastern Air Transport was changed to Eastern Airlines. In 1934, Captain Eddie Rickenbacker of World War I secured financial backing and bought Eastern. Captain Eddie guided them until 1963, when he was forced to retire due to his health. When the airmail contracts were rebid, Delta won the route from Dallas-Fort Worth to Charleston, South Carolina. And on July the 4th, 1934, Delta started their first service into Atlanta as a continuous operation using the tri-motored Stinson. This is Atlanta's first municipal air terminal. It was started around 1934, the tower being added in 1938 to include the air controllers and the Weather Bureau. The DC-2 was put into service here in 1934 by Eastern. Delta placed this plane in service in 1940. It carried 14 passengers and flew at 165 miles per hour. In 1936, Eastern introduced the DC-3, which carried 21 passengers with a speed of 170 miles per hour. This plane was put into service by Delta in 1940. In 1941, Delta was awarded two new routes, one from Atlanta to Cincinnati and Atlanta to Savannah. It was then that their general offices were moved from Monroe, Louisiana to Atlanta. This is what Candler Field looked like in the early 1940s. Sometimes it was called Hangar Row. It includes the old Hangar Hotel and Theater, where Morrison's cafeteria is located today. Eastern put the DC-4 into service in 1945, and a year later, Delta added them to their fleet. It had 4 engines, carried 63 passengers, flying 220 miles per hour. They were the first planes to fly Chicago-Miami nonstop. The Lockheed Constellation was added to Eastern's fleet in 1947. To many, this aircraft was the Miss America of all airplanes. It was the first in Atlanta with a pressurized cabin. Delta added the Connie to their fleet in their merger with CNS in 1953. It had a speed of 300 miles per hour and carried 63 passengers. By 1948, traffic had outgrown the first passenger terminal building, and a temporary building was constructed. It boasted as having the world's longest ticket counter, 200 feet. Frank W. Halsey, after several years in aviation, founded Southern Airways. Southern was truly Atlanta's own airline. Southern started service June the 10th, 1949, from Atlanta to Memphis with intermediate stops, serving 6 cities using the DC-3. By 1974, they were serving 67 cities, 13 states, and the District of Columbia. Southern started with 1 flyable DC-3 and 36 employees. On July the 1st, 1979, Southern merged with North Central, and both were renamed Republic. Republic now serves more cities than any other U.S. airline. In 1954, Delta placed the first of a fleet of DC-7s into service, the finest of the piston-type aircraft, and a year later, Eastern added this plane. 4 engines carrying 77 passengers with a speed of 350 miles per hour. It was in 1957 that Eastern added the Lockheed Electra prop jet, the forerunner of the pure jet, cruising at 400 miles per hour, carrying 82 passengers. The jet age dawned in Atlanta with the DC-8. Delta was the first airline in the world to put it into service September the 18th, 1959. The following year, Eastern added it to their fleet. This plane flies 350 miles per hour and carries 139 passengers. Northwest started serving Atlanta in November 1959. Their home office is in Minneapolis, St. Paul. February the 10th, 1960, Delta's first Convair 880 lifted off the ground in San Diego and set a new transcontinental speed record to Miami. Delta was the first airline to fly this new jetliner. In 1962, when Jack Gray retired after serving 33 years as airport manager, Grady Ridgway was appointed the second airport manager, or now called Commissioner of Aviation. Atlanta's third passenger terminal building was completed in 1962. And June the 25th, 1962, Piedmont Airlines began their first operations into Atlanta using the Fairchild F-27 prop jet. This cruised at 250 miles per hour and carried 40 passengers. Later, they introduced the 737 Boeing jet with 2 engines and a speed of 550 miles per hour, carrying 90 passengers. Eastern added in 1963 the 727 Boeing, the beginning of a new design, in that 3 engines are located in the tail section. Delta added these to their fleet with the merger of Northeast in 1972. Late in 1965, Delta began scheduled service with the DC-9, making them the only airline to be the first to operate 3 different jetliners, Eastern adding them in 1967. It had a speed of 600 miles per hour and carried 88 passengers with 2 engines. Delta's fleet was expanded in September 1966 with the Lockheed L-100 air freighter. It was built at Marietta, Georgia, just 30 miles north of Atlanta. Braniff began service on a continuous basis in 1969, their home office being in Dallas-Fort Worth. On October the 2nd, 1970, the largest jetliner ever designed for commercial passenger service, the 747, joined Delta's fleet. The following year, Eastern started operating the 747 through Atlanta. Its speed is 600 miles per hour, carrying 370 passengers. Eastern was the first in the world to put the L-1011 into service in 1971. Delta added these to their fleet in 1973. It has 1 engine located in each wing and 1 in the tail section. The speed is 550 miles per hour, and it carries 250 passengers. July the 1st, 1971 was another first for Atlanta, when Eastern started a scheduled international flight to Mexico City, and then in 1972, an international flight to Jamaica or Montego Bay. On August the 1st, 1972, Delta and Northeast merged, with Delta's Owler and Early Bird welcoming Northeast Yellowbird into the family, bringing 3,500 employees and approximately 10,000 miles of additional route. The energy crisis now causing all airlines to look for more economical planes, Eastern added to their fleet a foreign-built plane, the A300, in 1978. It was built by Airbus Industrie in France, and it cruises at 550 miles per hour, carries 280 passengers. On April 30th, 1978, the first transatlantic flight from Atlanta was made by Delta to London to link the southeast with the European continent, and it was soon expanded to serve Frankfurt, West Germany. Also in April 1978, Grady Ridgway retired, and George Berry became Atlanta's 3rd airport manager, or Commissioner of Aviation. Deregulation of all airlines was now on the horizon, for in June, Sabina was the first foreign flag to operate into Atlanta. Then in August, Frontier began service to Atlanta, with headquarters in Denver, Colorado. And Ozark, with home offices in St. Louis, started service into Atlanta in December. British Caledonia, the second foreign flag, began cargo service on September the 27th, 1979, and passenger service on June the 1st, 1980. Lufthansa was the third foreign flag to begin service on May 1st, 1980. KLM was the fourth foreign carrier to operate into Atlanta, starting service March 29, 1981. KLM, Royal Dutch Airline. It is the oldest airline in the world, still operating under its original name. In September 1980, the fourth passenger terminal building was dedicated. The Midfield Terminal is the largest and the most modern of its kind in the world. It is designed to handle 75 million passengers a year. This new facility is a living symbol of faith by the airline industry and by Atlanta.
Thank you for flying wings. We hope that you have enjoyed your flight, and we wish you a very pleasant stay in the land of the past. When your future plans call for history, please remember Hapeville's Historical Society. Good night.
My father, Looney James Fletcher, was born April 21st, 1875 in Bowden, Georgia, and my mother, Hattie Adderhold, was born November 18th, 1877 in Waco, Georgia. I am Aaron Fletcher, born in Carrollton on October 6, 1900, the first of their 7 children, 6 girls and 1 boy. Father was a deputy sheriff. When I was about a year old, we moved to Atlanta. To prevent lynching of a black prisoner, one night Daddy walked with the man along the railroad tracks all the way from Carrollton to the jail in Atlanta. Because of this, President Roosevelt, Teddy that is, gave him an appointment as a guard at the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. We lived in a small house on McDonough Street near the prison, and when I was old enough, I went to Prior Street School. When Daddy was promoted up to deputy warden, our family moved into the red brick house next door to the warden's home on the prison grounds. This house still stands. Trusted prisoners were house servants. On Friday or Saturday nights, we children would go to the movies inside the prison. We'd sit in the balcony. One Friday night while we were having dinner, the butler came in and whispered to Daddy. Very calmly, Daddy said, "We won't be going to the movie tonight." He had been told some prisoners had guns, were planning to take his children hostage and make their escape. About 1915, Father was transferred to Leavenworth, Kansas. I attended high school and college there. During World War I, I worked for the federal government as a stenographer in the Department of Justice. About 1921, we moved back to Atlanta and into the same house on the prison grounds. In 1930, I married Gordon L. Red Darden. He was working for Ford Motor Company on Ponce de Leon Avenue in Atlanta, and we had an apartment nearby. Ford transferred Red to Cincinnati, and from there he was drafted into government production service during World War II.
We moved to Pennsylvania and Buffalo, New York, where we saw plenty of snow. Then to sunny California, and it was while living there I gave up my flying career. The airport was just too far from home, and I had a full-time job. Ford Motor Company decided to build a plant in Hapeville, and Red was transferred here. Due to the housing shortage, we couldn't find a place to live closer than Marietta. In 1943, we built this house at 3307 La Vista Drive in Hapeville, and it is still my home. While we were building the house, and Red was involved in construction of the Ford plant, I kept the roads hot, traveling back and forth from Marietta in my red roadster. Building materials were hard to find. There were very few houses in this area of Hapeville, and some of my friends were concerned that I might not be safe living over there in the woods. Of course, it's not woods anymore. Hapeville is lovely with the azaleas, dogwoods, beautiful lawns, and flowers. Red and I never had children, only our dog Mitzi and a coon named Joe. Though supposed to be mortal enemies, I guess nobody ever told them, and they played together like two kittens. My nieces and nephews have been very close and have filled our lives with a sense of real family. My godchild, Kimberly Lou Krager, shown here with her mother, my niece Linda, has all her life been a blessing and a joy. Linda has been like a daughter to me. Red retired from Ford in 1963, and he died in November 1971. You've heard a brief outline of background information on the facts of my life. Now let's talk about a subject dear to my heart, flying. Flying for fun it was then. While Red and I were living in Atlanta in 1931 and 1932, I had friends who were interested in flying, Ruth Moore, Charlotte Fry, and Madeline Johnson. I would go with them to the old Candler Field when it was nothing but an old racetrack with a few buildings and a pot-bellied stove, which was the meeting place for aviators of all kinds to swap tall tales of flying. One day, the bug bit me, and I decided if they can fly, I can too. So I asked Doug Davis to give me lessons. I didn't tell my husband. He came one day to pick me up at the field and was told I was flying. He said to Doug Davis, "That's my wife up there." And Doug said, "Well, it's my plane." After Red caught me, he agreed to finish paying for my lessons, which cost $12 an hour. I learned to fly in a Waco, soloed in only 9 hours, the first person in the South to solo in this short a time. A private license required 50 hours solo flying, as well as written and flying tests before the Department of Commerce inspector, including spins, stalls, etc. I received my license and became one of the first female pilots in Georgia. I don't remember female piloting as being history-making. I just remember the good times and the thrill of it. You didn't have to be a women's libber to fly a plane in 1932. At first, some of the men resented women pilots, but most of them were glad to help us. I remember how one pilot helped prevent me from flying into a storm. I mistook his actions as some kind of flirtation, as he in his plane steered me into the runway. There was no radio contact. I had 2 brushes with calamity, once running into a rain squall and getting off course, and once when the engine quit after takeoff from Candler Field, but finally resumed after some frantic throttle jerking. It was difficult flying the awkward-looking biplanes because you had to look from side to side to see where you were going. I was most experienced at flying in open cockpit planes like the Fairchild 22 two-seater biplane. All we had was a stick, gas gauge, and altimeter. The 99ers Air Club was a group of 99 women pilots in the United States who flew planes for pleasure, and I was a charter member. Amelia Earhart was our first national president. We had a small clubhouse located on Candler Field. Every year there would be an air race called the Powder Puff Derby from California to the East Coast with refueling stops in between. 99ers literally crisscrossed the country, meeting each other at various points in our travels. Amelia Earhart made several visits to Atlanta, and on one of these had lunch with the 99 Club members in Georgia. Here she is pictured with the club's reception committee, Ruth Moore, Madeline Johnson, me, and Charlotte Fry. Flying a Lockheed Vega, Amelia Earhart made a solo flight Hawaii to Oakland, California, and 99ers all over the country followed radio reports as closely as we could, praying she would make it. When we finally heard she was nearing the coast with enough fuel left to finish the flight, we breathed a sigh of relief. In June 1934, about 35 Atlanta aviation enthusiasts in 10 small planes participated in the South's first Aero picnic, a flying junket to Warm Springs. The planes took off from Candler Field on Sunday morning at 8 a.m. and arrived in Warm Springs about an hour later. An automobile carried lunch for the group. They were greeted by the mayor of Warm Springs, enjoyed the day, and flew back to Atlanta late in the afternoon. Only one plane failed to reach the destination. He was forced down at Molina by motor trouble, but continued on to the picnic by auto. First plane to arrive in Warm Springs was piloted by Doug Davis, who was flying his own plane, the same plane he flew in the national air races. His plane was the center of interest, and upon departure, Doug did a few turns for the crowd, then swept by the field at a low altitude with the engine wide open. Amelia Earhart and I became good friends. We had dinner together the evening before she set out on her first attempt to become the first woman to fly solo around the world. On her first try, her plane crashed in Hawaii, but she tried again, and her plane was lost July 2nd, 1937, somewhere over the Pacific Ocean. She was never heard from again. This picture of Amelia and her navigator, Fred Noonan, was taken in Miami at the time of her last checkup before her takeoff on the fatal trip. Though I have no proof, I believe Amelia was flying a spy mission for the government at the time of her disappearance. It was while Red and I were living in Cincinnati during World War II that I served in the Civil Air Patrol. We flew patrol over the Ohio River and surrounding area. This group picture was made at Camp Zaleski, Ohio. I'm the last one on the right of the front row. Flying has not been my only interest. I love life and I love people. I've kept myself busy and active. I like to play cards, enjoy swimming, fishing, saw bullfights in Spain, traveling, went to Europe on the Queen Elizabeth. There are not many spots I haven't hit. I've been almost everywhere except for Australia, Africa, and the communist countries. I have been an active member of Hapeville Presbyterian Church for many years. In 1970, I was ordained an elder and served on the ruling body of the church, the first woman to serve in such a position in this church. Then in May 1985, the church honored me by naming me Elder Emeritus. My church is dear to me, and the fellowship of Christian friends has been a source of strength in my life. My years of volunteer service as a Pink Lady at South Fulton Hospital have been happy and rewarding. Many auxiliary members have become close personal friends. I have continued my interest in every aspect of flying. when the 1050 Club was formed for the purpose of providing basic financial support for the Interfaith Airport Chaplaincy, I was a charter member. Here, Glenna Mae Davis and I are presenting our first checks to Perry Hudson, chairman. Here I am in the cockpit of an old Travel Air 6000, a plane just like the one with which Delta inaugurated commercial passenger service in 1929. This plane was flown by Captain Norman Topshee from Orlando to Atlanta in 1979 for appearance in Delta's 50th anniversary exposition. On July 2nd, 1987, the 50th anniversary of Amelia Earhart's disappearance, women pilots all over the world took to the air in salute to her memory. Bruce Arian of 11 Alive TV Skycam took me on a helicopter trip over Atlanta. He interviewed me at home for the special news report that night. He told me I was as excited as a 7-year-old, not almost 87, and he was right. I loved it. I have had the pleasure of knowing personally some of the world's most famous flyers, including Amelia Earhart, Roscoe Turner, May and Jim Hazlett, Jacqueline Cochran, Doug Davis, Bela Blevins, and many, many more. I have had the honor of being invited to Washington, D.C. as a delegate to the 54th Congress on Aviation, and I have had the thrill of attending air races all over the country. Things have changed a lot at Hartsfield since my flying days. The planes are bigger, more numerous, and the new terminal is a far cry from the pot-bellied stove in a drafty hangar. But I still get goosebumps when I see a plane take off. It's like an itchy feeling around the heart. Since this interview, Erin has been ill for several months. She is a pioneer again in that she is only the second patient to enter the new Presbyterian Village nursing home in Austell, Georgia. Her love for the Presbyterian Church made her decide to go there when she was discharged from South Fulton Hospital, another of her loves. We wish her well and hope she will be much improved very soon.
I'm thankful to the Historical Society for doing that live. I hope you enjoyed the program.
We would like to close this narrative with a quotation. This prophetic statement is from a speech given by Mr. Bela Blevins in 1933. The truth is that no man knows as yet what aviation means and will mean to us. For I am confident that the mighty strides that will be made in aerial navigation in the coming years will cause the earth to appear so small in the eyes of human beings who soar far overhead at speeds undreamed of today, that eventually they will look to new inventions and new devices which will conquer new outer spaces and new worlds beyond the attraction of our own. Flying is here to stay, and opportunities are endless. Who can predict what the next 50 years will bring?